Hello guys and welcome back. Finally the first video from my new studio, and I'm really glad to be here with one of the best player in this game in this moment, Enricomaria Rustico. Today another old type of video is back, the master guide. Enrico won the first OP12 regional with Rayleigh, one of the best deck of this format. He made a guide. You can buy it on MetaFi and you can find the link in the description. So if you want to go more deep with the deck, I recommend you to buy it. Now Enrico will explain some topic about the deck, how to play it, a deck list, how to approach some best matchup of this format.
Okay, so let's start with the most common question that I was asked during several interviews. Why should you play Rayleigh in this meta? So the answer is quite simple, at least from my side. A lot of people knows that I like to play very consistent decks, especially in One Piece where we have best of one format. I think it's important to play the most consistent decks. I think right now Rayleigh is what is the closest we ever been in One Piece to a consistent deck. You always do the same thing very consistently since you play a lot of searchers, and also the deck itself plays very well against all the tier ones. It's very good because you can play very well against GP, against UP. Mirror match is very skilled. That sometimes is something very important in One Piece because you have some really good decks, but then the mirror match is not as skilled. And then against Pony you are slightly unfavored, but it's a really playable matchup. And also with the latest tournaments, I think a big increase in teach will occur. So I think also that matchup is quite favorable for Rayleigh. And then in the worst case, if you don't know how to play it, it's a 50-50. The deck has the potential to be the best deck in the meta. Also Zoro is free, but it's a very common deck in the meta. I think right now probably Green Zoro is the most common deck in the meta, and having already a good matchup against the most common deck is very important. The only downside to the deck is the deck building is very limited. We have very few spots. That is why we'll talk a little bit about the deck list. But yeah, overall I think is probably the best deck to pick now, because in such a format is the best pick to not lose game, because sometimes in One Piece, since it's best of one, we might lose gains to brick because we draw very bad hands. Going into the deck list, so right now a lot of people ask me if I changed anything. So the deck list for me stayed the same. The only flex spot that I do have at this moment is like switching the 2k Sanjis for 2k Brooks. It really depends. If you expect a lot of Snakeman in the field, then probably Brook is better. The only small change that I made, I switched one Armamentaki for one to Never Doubt, because in the end they are both 2Ks, but at least you have more consistency in getting the unblockable event. If you never play the deck, so you usually in the early game play the searchers. So the searchers are of course the core of the deck. You can search. Usually with my deck list, at least you have 18 targets for both Nami and Buggy, while for Shaki and Boa you have 24 targets. And for the zero cost events, the observation, you have 30 targets. Let's say cards of the deck are of course the Luffy and the Sanjis, 3-cost Sanji, because of course they're the best combo in the deck. And then the rest is basically supporting tools. You have the 2-cost Luffys to support the search with the Shaki and Boa, and also it's a good card when you want to develop, but still you want to make the 4-cost Luffy a 6k. A lot of people I saw that switched to this card and they realized how good is it. So I'm quite happy a lot of people realized. And then you have the rushers, of course, you are forced to play. You play 2 and 2 because you can search both with the observation, and then you need the 2 targets with Zoros for the Nami to go to 18 targets. I will always play 4 Hidden Killers, but since we need to reach the targets for Nami, I play 2 and 2. For the other events, you have 2 Mulligan. Some people, they ask me, why don't you play 3? Because of the bunny matchup. Problem is that in a lot of other matchups, the third Mulligan will be very bad. You can search the Mulligan with basically every searcher in the deck. So you have an extension to this card almost everywhere. 1 Radical Beam and 1 Gatling, because I like diversity. I think Radical Beam is mandatory in this deck, is so good. And the Gatling also, back in the days I was playing 1 because I was expecting some Snakeman, but now I think Snakeman is so popular, you're forced to play it anyway. The only change you can do is switch 2 Sanjis for 2 Brooks, but it's up to you how you prefer. I think it's very important for a lot of people to I think the Brook can really help you out with that matchup, but to be honest, I find myself better with the Sanji, because if I face someone that is trying to starve me, at least I have an option in the deck to get out of that situation. And also if you play Brook, you don't have the 100% chance to see it in the Snakeman. Let's go to the general strategy. Simple as possible. You have 2 phases of the game with Rayleigh. The first phase is to develop board control, too many like as many pieces as possible. Try to capitalize on the fact that you can really do a lot of attacks, especially when you play against the slower decks. You really want to do as many attacks as possible. Always prioritize developing my board, but always going with as many 5 and 6s as possible. Why is it so important to go with the 6s? Because against a lot of decks, you can kind of hand check them and see if they actually have counters to not die too soon. So if you do a lot of 6s, you can see if they have a 2k, if they don't have a 2k. Sometimes you might just win the game because you go 6, they have to take a damage that they shouldn't, and then you recognize they don't have a 2k in a hand, and then you can go with a lot of 6ks. Attacks. So the general strategy in the early game has to be always develop something to swing for next turn. If you swing with a searcher, you just let it go most of the times, because I try to visualize every searcher as like you play it, you draw one card, and they swing for once, and then they block one attack. So like you get 3 core values out of one searcher, and that is very important. And that is also why I think a lot of people, they fail to do, like, for example, with the boa, they tend to sacrifice it a lot to use the effect, but sometimes it's actually better to keep it on board, because then they have to swing on it. Because if you aggro too much in the early game, you will have to give up a board development, and like your opponent will have too many cards in the late game, and it will be very difficult for you to come back, because it's like your deck will start very high with power level, and then will slowly decrease as you go into the late game. And that is why your objective and your game plan is to put them at 0 as soon as possible, because then in the late game you won't be weak, because you will have the to never doubt, and you can just swing with the leader and win the game. So it's really important to have this first part of the game where you actually play for value and not to aggro them. So you just go as wide as possible. You go with a lot of 5, 6Ks. And then what is the most important thing with the deck is to recognize you have one particular turn with the deck where you need to switch from like value taker into aggro mode. And that is like, if you manage to recognize that phase very well, then you will win all the games. So every deck has usually like a play that can swing the game into defense mode for them, or like make things easier. I will take a simple example as the 8-cost Mihawk, for example. Brings a lot of defense for your opponent. So usually the turn you want to switch into aggro mode is the one before they can drop the Mihawk. Because once they drop the Mihawk, it will be more difficult to go with like a very strong attacks. So you will have to do fewer attacks, but they will also need to be 8k attacks. So it's really important to always ask yourself, like, what phase of the game am I at? And if you manage to recognize the switch from value taker into aggro mode, then it will be much easier for you to win the game. So the strategy itself is in the end to recognize these 2 phases, and then phase 2 basically almost always ends with like your opponent is at 0 life, you play the unblockable event, you go 15 lead, and then you just win the game with that. Sometimes you can go even like 17 or 18, or like best case scenario even more, but that's usually the plan. And abuse Conqueror Aki. Conqueror Aki is like the best card in the deck. You can use it in the mid game, and especially in the late game to advance, like to gain extra turns to push the lethal. So it's really important to understand how to make the best out of this card, and also to recognize which turns you actually need it. It's really matchup dependent when you need it or not. Especially in the mirror match, you can really see the power of this card. Against a lot of decks, you can just leave one down open, and then they will go crazy because they don't know how much they have to swing. Usually in the mid game, I tend to use one of them, and then I always keep all of them in the late game. I always take 2 damage in all the mid matchups, because then you will enter a phase of the game where they always have to swing on your pieces. So it's important to take the first 2 damage, because then they will be forced to go on the pieces, and they won't be able to go face anyways. So it's important to take those first 2 damage, because you will have 2 extra cards in your hand to defend your pieces, 2 extra cards to see the combo pieces, and then eventually they will go on the board. So you will have more time where actually they won't swing at you. So you will stay at 3 life most of the game. So this is the general strategy of the deck. I think it's quite... So we start with the mirror match. So the mirror match is aggroing your opponent. You cannot afford to trade the small pieces when they have multiples on board. So let's say they have, for example, 2 searchers on board. It doesn't make sense to swing at one of them, because they can always only use leader effect on one of them. So it's really important to understand also down management from both sides. Always keep in mind that you and your opponent will need to keep 1 down open for Conqueror. You will need to use 2 dawns to make the Luffy 6k. So actually every turn we'll have 3 less dawns to be used to play cards. I like to go first, but most people, they like to go second. I think, to be honest, it doesn't really matter. I think going first is more complex. So if you don't consider yourself a pro player, let's say, I would say going second is more safe. The problem with going second is that you will have less chances to hit the Luffy Sanji combo on curve. And if you fail to play that combo on curve, it will be more difficult for you to put pressure on your opponent, because they will have more attacks if they go first, and the matchup is all about going face. The most important thing in the mirror match is to always develop pieces, 6Ks of course, and to always keep in the mid game a dawn open for Conqueror, because you cannot let them capitalize on 7K swings. And also this switch between value taker to aggro will happen very soon in the mirror match, so you need to be careful with that. I never waste a 5K swing on a 2 or 3K, because I need to swing a face, because you need to take cards out of your opponent's hand, otherwise they will have too many cards in the late game and you won't be able to kill them. The management of the life is really important. When you go to 2, you have to be already in a late stage of the game, because if you get too soon to 2, then you enable all the hidden killers from your opponent. So you also need to consider that, because Conqueror, when you use it, will give -1 only to what is present on board at that time, and then the hidden killer can enter later and then just swing for 7. So you need to be careful with that. I think the most important thing in the mirror match is to understand how many turns you need to win the game and how many turns does your opponent have to kill you. So once you manage to recognize this thing, you can set up the turns based on like, what do I need to trade, what do I need to go face, and then set up lethal in the best way possible. Always keep in mind they have Radical Beam, they have Conqueror, so it's not easy to kill your opponent, but also you are very defensive, so you need to be careful, especially in the mid game, to not take too much damage. Otherwise in the late game will be more difficult to survive. Then next matchup we have Green Zoro. Quite simple matchup. You want to go second. Why? Because you delayed Mihawk. I always try, and with no pieces on board, so especially when they develop a 7K or like a 6K, if I already established like Luffy Sanji, then I like to do Mulligan, because it's really important against Zoro, especially, to go with a lot of value trades. You need to take a lot of 5s/6s in the early game and the mid game, because then they will struggle in the late game. Green decks, they don't have a lot of cycle in their hands, so they will struggle not taking all that damage. And then the turn before they can drop the Mihawk, you need to switch on 7K attacks. If they keep one down open, always keep in mind they play the demonic aura, so also 8K swings are better. And in the early game, you need to go as wide as possible with the small guys, because if they develop a Yori or like they have a Perona, you want to trade that. Their leader has to swing on the big guys, so like Sanji and Luffy, so they cannot really afford to kill the small ones. And then if you develop enough in the early game, you would kind of snowball. Especially against Zoro, if you put them at 0, they're dead. So your objective is to really take cards in the early game, mid game, start pushing without neglecting the board. You don't want to take too much damage, because of course they can pressure you a lot. But always keep in mind you have Conqueror and Radical Beam, so it's really difficult for them to kill you, even with a double big swing. And then, okay, once before they drop the Mihawk, you usually want to put them at like 2-1 life. If you put them at 2, then you got like 2 turns to put them at 0. Most of the times, like 99% of the times, if you swing a 15K unblockable against Zoro, you win the game. And also like Buggy is super strong because they cannot kill it. The Conqueror is so good because when you're Luffy 6K and you keep one down open, if they want to go 8-on-6, they cannot, because you just conquer. So you will kind of force them to use more dawns than they should to trade. And still, like, you can always use 2 cards to save it. So it's really good. And that's also why the 2-cost Luffy is so good in this matchup, because you can just, when they win the battle and they let you go first, you can like do Luffy into Luffy, then assign 2 dawns to the Luffy, and then even if they play Tashigi on curve and they go like 9-on-6, at least you can like conquer and counter or something like that. While if Luffy is 4K, it's gonna die 100%. Next matchup is Snakeman. It's quite straightforward. There is not really many tips for this. Early game, you should focus on putting in as many attacks as possible. You want to go second in this matchup. So if turn 1, for example, you develop a Boa and then you play Luffy Sanji, you give the Dawn to Boa, then you swing 6 with Boa, then you sacrifice Boa, you swing 7 with the leader. So you already put 2 swings, and the next turn you have like 6, 6, 8, then you develop again, and like so on, so on. So usually your objective is to try and put them at 0 before they reach 8 down. Sometimes it's better to go double 7 instead of 6, 8, for example, because you kind of challenge them to have the right counters. Your objective is to put them at 0, but still to trim their hand, because if you don't, and they will have all the cards and go to 0, they might just hide behind the Nami. If they get to 10 downs and they play Nami, blocker, and then they have 5 downs open, most of the times 15 won't be enough. So you need to reach that point of the game where they have very few cards in hand. You can actually win the game with either a double 15 unblockable or like more That's why the Gatling is so good, because sometimes maybe they can counter 15, but they cannot counter, for example, 17, 18. But sometimes you can also use it kind of in the mid to late game, because then you can just put them at 0, because if they start developing the Namis with 1 life, then you will be cooked. It's very difficult. You need to pressure them as much as possible, and that's why Brook is better than Sanji, because sometimes you can keep developing while assigning the dons and swinging more. So that's one of the most important things. And then once you reach them, once they go to 0, you basically want to try to kill them. If you force them to use double giant in 1 turn, usually you win the game. Sometimes you don't even get to that point, you win before. So it's really important to keep developing and leaving the pieces on board. It's really important to save the 6Ks. You don't really care about saving the 2Ks or 3Ks, because then they require too many dons to swing, so it's not as good. Bonnie is the most infamous matchup. I think I already explained this quite a lot in several posts and videos. I think Bonnie, it's all about going as wide as possible and also saving the small guys. I tend to go as wide as possible because I already know I can kind of snowball the board control, especially in the early game. So for example, if I go second, you want to go second in this matchup, also for the Mihawk, because also they have Mihawk into Tenko Stuffy, so you don't want to let them go second. When you go second, you can just develop 2 bodies, or if you have a Boa, you can think about delaying it, because you already know turn 2 you will swing. So always keep in mind that unless you really have a lot of searchers, you don't want to develop on the turn 1, because then they will just rest it. But to be honest, you really want to find the Luffy Sanji. So sometimes playing the searcher on turn 1, it makes sense to maximize the chances to find the Luffy Sanji. That is, of course, the best thing to do, because you cheat out dons and then you develop more board control more easily. The rule against Bonnie is quite simple. You go with a lot of 5 and 6s, and then you always try to develop in that turn 2 pieces that are standing. So you avoid losing to carrots or to Origins and whatever. So it's always good to have so let's say you have several pieces, you swung 5 and 6s, and then you develop Luffy and something. So you have 2 pieces already ready for next turn, because one of them they will rest, but then you will have leader and that piece attack. So the important thing is to try to trim their hand, because then you get them out of the 8-cost kid plan. And one of the most important things in this matchup is the management of Mulligan. Mulligan you really want to play when you're already established on board, so you have several 6Ks on board. You can play the Mulligan to kill, for example, a carrot, but always keep in mind that you need to use Mulligan based on how they're playing. So if they're playing they're getting all the damage and you already know they were playing for kit, you might just want to hold the Mulligan for that. So it's really important to recognize that. I think the best thing to do against Bonnie is to understand what their win condition is and then play accordingly. Same game plan, you want to put them at 0, just differently from Zoro. You need to be careful, because if you put them at 0, then they have several options to delay their death. That is a 10-cost Toffee. They can freeze your leader, so you cannot unblockable 15k. They had 8-cost kids, so they will kind of eat one of the swings. And these 2 cards generally can really slow you down. So you also have to understand how much time do you actually have, or how many cards can they chain to delay your lethal turn. That's why it's so important to develop board control, because then even if they freeze your board, then they always kind of delay this board that is already established, and they have to play Duffy back to back, and it's really difficult for them. And also they have to go on the board, so you are gaining extra turns of life. Some Bonnies will starve you. That's why the Sanji is so good, because you can take some life. If they attack you, I usually take the first 2 damage very easily. Sometimes I even take 3 damage, because I already know they will need to go on the board, so it's very complex for them to pressure you. And Hori Jones is not even a real win condition, because they cannot play it until very late in the game, and it means they're going for lethal basically. So also keep that in mind when keeping dons open. Try to calculate, okay, if they Hori me, do I die or not? That's really important. But the general rule in the deck is save every piece that only ask you for 1 card. So for example, what I do in the mid game is if I swing with a 3k, I keep 1 don open, because if they go 5-on-3 with the leader, then I just conquer and then I save it. You don't really need the conqueror so much in the matchup, because they almost always swing for 5 or 6, so the conqueror is not doing so much. But saving 1 piece can really change your whole game, because 1 extra swing can put them 1 turn before at 0, or you can get 1 card. And it's always very important to hand check them a lot, because Bonnie breaks a lot. So it's really important to go 5 and 6s, because then you can really see, okay, if you go a 6 and they take, you might say, okay, I want to start with a 6 next, because if they take again, then they're bricked, and then you want to capitalize on that. Also there, you need to visualize like, okay, when do I need to switch from value taker into aggro? Same thing before they drop Mihawk. And then the only question you should ask yourself is whether you want to trade Carrot or not. All the rest of the pieces I usually leave on board. Maybe if they swing with an Uroge, I tend to trade it because if they don't have Uroge on board, then they cannot play on curve, for example, the 10 cost Doffy, sorry. It's really important to remove it as soon as possible. For the rest, like Cavendish, I mostly ignore. Carrot, unless it's really a free trade, I just ignore it. And then, also rush pieces sometimes are very good. Other than that, it's very, very similar to Zoro. I think the only main difference is that they can freeze your characters. So Zoro puts you more pressure, Bonnie freezes more characters, so it's like it slows down the game a lot. So you need to recognize your win conditions. Sometimes you might also win by going double unblockable. It's also an option. But I that's like the last resort. I would avoid. If you can manage to put them at 0 by not using double unblockable, is good, because then you can easily win. They can never counter 15k, like 99% of the times they cannot. So if you put them at 0 and then you have unblockable, you usually win the game. Last matchup is Teach, becoming more and more popular now. There is a big argument if going first or second is better. I prefer to go second for the only fact that if you start with a 2-cost character, then they cannot play Doku on curve and kill it. So you have a free swing, basically. So I tend to go second. Always try to play only 2, 3, or 4-cost characters, and then never drop the 1 cost, because then I just stack all the 1 cost together, and then in one turn I drop all of them together. In this matchup, you really want to go with a lot of 5s, because you need to take cards out of their hands. They always discard each turn, so they will just kill themselves very slowly. And I always take the first 2 damage. They don't have time to pressure you at all, and they will need to go on the pieces. Here is the same principle as we said with Bonnie. If you can keep 1 on open, it's good, because if they go 5 on 3, for example, you want to save the piece. Even saving a 3k is very good against Teach. So always keep it in mind. The best characters in this matchup are the Rush, of course, because they're very fast, they're difficult to remove. And usually you always want to end up having at least 1 piece that can attack at the end of the turn. So even if they remove something, you want to have 1 piece. And it's really important that in the first phase of the game, you remove the Docus and the Van Augers, because if you leave them on board, then they will snowball you and they will get free value that they actually lose by discarding each turn. So in the first phase of the game, you want to trade those. And then there is one part of the game where you switch to like pushing. You just ignore them because you just want to push, because your objective is to actually put them at 0. Teach is one of those matchups where like double unblockable event usually wins you the game. So if you can manage to have two of those, of course it's easier. Keep in mind that you cannot search in this matchup except with the observation, so it's more complex to do it, but that's a really good win condition. Most of the times you will win with unblockable leader, so you just need to put them at 0. Mulligan is not required in this matchup. 3-cost Sanji is really good. All the 2 costs are really good. So like Boa, Luffy, and the 2-cost Sanji is really good. All the 1-drops are really good on turn 1, and then later on will be a good support. Like when you develop, for example, if you develop like a 3 or 2 or 4 cost, and then you develop together with that a 1 cost, it might stick on the board and be annoying. Sometimes if you develop 2 together, they cannot deal with it. So like you have then later on every like 3 or 2k can swing for like 5 minimum, and then it can go up to 7. So you can pressure a lot. So always keep in mind that just sticking 1 piece on the board at the end of their turn, it's really good, because if you can put each turn 2 swings to Teach, you usually have the best chances to win the game. And that's why Rush are so good, because actually they give you a double swing on the turn. And once they have very few cards in hand, then you can start going with the bigger attacks. And then your objective is to just put them at 0. Once you put them at 0, it's like win. Most of the times they might not have the blocker either, so you just win 15 and you win the game. But it's really important in the early game, especially to establish board each turn. And the board doesn't have to be 1-drops, because the 1-drops are really easy to get rid of. And also the bigger drops are asking for them to develop a Van Auger. And if they don't have Van Auger, like even developing a Van Auger can be seen as like a -1 from their hand. So it's really important to force them to use the cards they have. Because even if they go Shiryu, for example, let's say they play Shiryu, they're still using 1 card from their hand. So it's really important that you kind of force them to discard the cards or to use them, because then since they cannot really pressure you, you will have time to win with only leader, because every turn the leader can go 7, 7, 7, and then if they go to 0, then you just go unblockable and you win the game. Try to recognize how many turns left do you have. They almost never can play 10-cost Teach anyways, so just don't think about that. And then once they get to 1 life, basically they're in danger zone because they cannot pressure you at all. And once they reach 1 life, they will need to develop a blocker each turn, because otherwise you just go, okay, everything on leader's wing, you go to 0, and then next turn unblockable, I win. So actually you just need to put them at 1 life, and then from there, if they go to 0, they just lose the game. I think the matchup is slightly favored for us, but it's very complex to play. So some players might find themselves in a weak spot, but I think it's super winnable. It's I think mirror match is 50-50, of course. I don't think that all changes a lot. Green Zoro is favored for us, probably 70-30 or something. You want to go seconds. UP 50-50, you want to go seconds. Bonnie 60-40 for Bonnie, you want to go seconds. And then Teach, I think 60-40 for us, you want to go seconds. If you want to go, of course, deeper into the details of every matchup and everything about the deck, you can always check my guide in the description below Metafy. In the guide, there are also a lot of video coachings of students I have. So also you can see how coaching it is. So if you think you need more detailed practice on a single matchup or like a live, also coaching is available. And then you can check out how it is in the guide as well. So yeah, I hope that was enough. And I hope I have helped everyone. I want to thank Gigi as usual for the opportunity to be here. And yeah, that's it.